Hi everyone, welcome back to Lair Academy. It's Mickey again, and in this lesson, we're going to tackle the controllers that we have for our landing page. The first thing we're going to do is create two controllers using our terminal. We need an email controller with PHP Artisan Make controller, and we also need an admin controller, and this controller we'll handle later on in the series. With these two controllers created, let's load up Sublime Text, and let's navigate to App, HTTP, controllers, and then email controller. In this controller, we're just going to have a single method. The method we're going to be calling is store. It'll be responsible for the action after a user clicks the button sign up for updates. Now, we're going to need some way to validate the input from the user. Laravel comes with some built-in validation, and there are multiple ways of doing this. But we are going to keep this really simple and use the controller validation. To do this, we have to refer to this for the controller and say validate, passing in our request and then our rules. So we'll say the email needs to be required and it needs to be a valid email address. This validation is basic enough so that if the input name of email does not exist in our request, meaning that we're asking for it to be required but it's not there, or the email address is invalid, Laravel is automatically going to kick back to the previous page with the error messages as well as the user input. If the validation passes, we want to store the email address into our table. However, we don't care if the user entered their email once, twice, or 5 times. We really just want to capture it. So to keep our code nice and clean, let's use a repository here. Underneath app, we'll create a new folder called repositories. And in that folder, let's create a new file and call it email repository.php. A repository is just like any other class in PHP. So we'll start off with our PHP tags, add in our namespace, which is app repositories, followed by the class name, email repository. Right now, our repository is only going to have one function or method, and let's call that method store. This method is going to accept a request variable, and we're also going to make it static. The reason we're making it static is so we don't have to new up an email repository every time. Now this method is automatically going to search for the email address, and if we find the email address, well, we just want to return the email in that case. However, if we don't find the email address, let's save it into the database. Luckily for us, Eloquent has a nice way to handle this. We will start off by saying return email, and because we're going to be using the email model, let's import it at the top. We'll say use app models email, and the method that we want to use is first or create. And we're going to pass in the email address here, so email equals our request variable, and then the email that we pass in. Before moving on, let's take a quick look at this. We're going to return an email where the email address is equal to the request email that we're passing in. However, if Laravel can't find it, it's going to create the email address from the request variable and just return it. And with that saved, let's import our repository at the top. So we'll say use app repositories email repository. And that's actually pretty long to type out. So let's say as email. Now what we can do is we can refer to the repository just as email. So we could say email, and we want to call our static function. And our static function in our case is just store. And now we want to pass the request variable. So we'll say request, and we want to make sure that we are only passing in the email. And before we return here, let's store the email address into a variable. Finally, at the end of our function, we want to return a redirect, and we want to return it to the route named home, and say with a session variable of success, and we want to set success to true. If you haven't used the with variable before, we're just setting the variable success in the session to true. If we open up our home.blade.php inside resources, views, and then home.blade.php, you can see here down near the bottom, we have a simple if statement to say, does the session have the variable success? And if it does, it's going to show this alert. If it doesn't have the variable success, we're going to include the partial signups, which you can see right here. Now, before we try and run everything, let's open up our web.php and make a new route for when the user clicks sign up. This route is going to be using a post method, and we're going to post whenever they hit the URL sign up. We're going to say we want to use our email controller, and the action that we want to use from the email controller is store. And let's give this route a name. Let's just call it sign up. Now we need to take this name and open up our signup.blade.php, and inside the form action, make sure that we're referring to that route. Now with everything saved, let's try and add an email address. We'll say support@lairacademy.co and click sign up, and we have our first error. Route home is not defined. So let's switch back to our web.php, and our first route, let's just give it a name, and the name that we're going to give it is home. Now with that fixed, let's save and refresh and post the data, and you can see that we get our awesome success message. We can refresh the page to get the form back, and let's fill in our email address again and hit sign up, and we still see the success message. So what that just means is our email repository is working correctly. It's storing the single email address no matter if the user entered it once, twice, or even 5 times. Let's enter one more email address and just click sign up. And let's refresh the page one more time. And let's check to see what happens if we don't fill in an email address and hit sign up. You can see there's no errors being returned. And that's actually just a really easy quick fix, but we're going to save that for the next lesson. Thanks for watching.